So these are going to be 5 mistakes that people do when they travel to Cuba. Hey guys, my name is Alex and welcome to alexr.emprende. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 mistakes, the most common 5 mistakes that I see people doing when they decide traveling to Cuba. If you want to get more information or even more travel tips, go to alexr.emprende and we're going to put the link down below so you can have a lot of tips and tricks before your trip to Cuba. Have you ever heard something like, don't think about this, just do it? Well, when it comes to traveling to Cuba, this is something that you shouldn't apply. Let me explain why. Number one is because they don't know how Cuba is. There is a lot of information that you should know, guys, before you land here. We've been talking about Cuba for a long time. Actually, we have made so many videos talking about how important it is to know how Cuba works. The reason is because Cuba is a very controversial country, and if you travel here without any clue, you're gonna have a lot of issues. The second mistake, or mistake number 2, that most people do when they come to Cuba is that they all travel to the same destination. They do all have the same schedule, they do the same tours, they visit the same cities, and this is something that you should avoid doing. The reason is because this is going to keep you out of the real Cuba. And by the real Cuba, I mean, if you want to know more about the real Cuban culture, if you want to know about how Cuba works, if you want to know more about how the Cuban people live, this is something that you won't find in Baradero, this is something that you won't find in the Cayos, this is something that you won't find even if you go to Old Havana only. I highly recommend you guys, when you do the research about visiting Cuba, try to look for something beyond the classic cars. That's why we highly recommend visitors trying to support Cuban people, going to a private business, trying to look for a private company here, try to look for something that is going to be helping you and showing you a little bit more about the Cuban culture. If you want to look for some like Cuban real culture, real Cuban roots, how Cuban history is, this is something that you should have a little bit more of time to learn. And of course, we're going to be talking about that later. Avoid walking all the time in the same old town, because most of the people are going to be tourists, or some of the people there are going to be working for tourists. But if you get inside of the community, if you get a tour, if you get a private service, like talking with a professional psychologist here, that person is going to be explaining you a little bit more how the deep Cuban life is, or how Cuba has been during all these years. And this is something you probably don't know about yet. We actually have launched like a blog in alexr.emprende.com where we're going to be trying to upload as much content as we can, blogs. So you're going to have a lot of tips and tricks that you should know before coming to Cuba. Whatever is the reason why you're traveling to Cuba, whatever is the city you want to travel, these tips are going to be helping you a lot. Third mistake that many people do when they travel to Cuba is like trusting everyone and believing what everyone is saying. What I mean by this is that you have no idea, guys, how many times I've been walking around in Old Havana and I've seen like many people believe in someone who's telling them, hey, I work in the cigar factory, I do have a license to sell cigars on the street, do you want to buy me one? Or some other people who might tell you, hey, do you want to try the Cuban food? I have the best place to go. And that person is going to get commission with that. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that those are like inoffensive people. But there's some others who are like looking for some opportunities to get some money from you without doing any effort. They don't work, they don't do anything. So what they've been working on is your like psychology. And you believe that Cubans, all of us, we are warm, kind, and we want to help. Because at the end, Cuban people are very helpful, but I highly recommend you to know exactly who you're going to be talking to. If you walk by and you see someone coming to you, just say, hey, thank you, but I'm not interested. But if you say, hey, hi, my name is Alex and I come from Canada. Oh yeah, sure, take me there. You don't know that person. Another great tip that I can give you to avoid this mistake is to have a list of the activities that you really want to do. I mean, if you know that you want to go to Old Havana, make sure that you have a list like the places that you want to visit in Old Havana, the activities that you can do inside of Old Havana. With that done, you're gonna have like a lot covered. Otherwise, many people are gonna tell you many things and you don't know exactly if they are like telling the truth or not. So by doing this, you're gonna have like the opportunity, the chance of avoiding taking bad decisions. The fourth mistake that many people do when they come to Cuba is that they come to Cuba thinking that Cuba is going to be very cheap and Cuba is going to be a very easy country. And by easy, I mean that you can go everywhere, you're gonna find everything. And by cheap, I mean you can get like a taxi for 10 bucks. Once you come here, once you land at the airport, you're gonna realize just by taking a taxi from the airport to whatever is the place that you're gonna be staying in, you're going to know how pricey Cuba is. And by pricey, I mean that a taxi could be 30, 35, or even 40 bucks if you don't know how to negotiate the price.
Cuba is in the middle of the Caribbean. Cuba is a very poor country. People need money, so it's going to be cheap. I'm going to go to Cuba with $500.
Actually, this is something that a client that I had told me about when he was coming on the plane. He was listening to another people coming to Cuba as well, and they were talking about, hey, you know what? I'm coming to Cuba with $500. What do you think about that? He said, you are insane, man. With $500 in Cuba for 15 days, you're not gonna do anything. I mean, taxi is expensive, food is expensive, the transportation among cities is going to be expensive. If you want to do some tours, it's going to be expensive. But the question is, why is Cuba that expensive? Well, we have some videos talking about that. And the last but not least mistake that most people do when they come to Cuba is visiting Cuba in a very short period of time. I've been working in the tourism industry for a long time now. And I've seen many people visiting Cuba for 2 days. I actually had a client when I was doing free walking tours in Old Town. I had a client who came from Japan 1 day just to see Havana. That's crazy because the experience that she had was beautiful, but she thought that Havana was Cuba. Old Town was Cuba. And this is something that you should avoid doing, because if you want to know exactly how Cuba is, 1 day, a weekend, even a week, sometimes it's not enough. So I highly recommend you guys to visit Cuba if you have the chance, if you have the budget for a minimum of 15 days. Of course, sometimes you just want to travel to Cuba for a week because you're not going to have time enough, or you want to visit some different countries in Latin America. That's completely fine. But if you're really focused on Cuba, because some people don't understand how Cuba is, and Cuba is one of those countries that you have always had in mind because all the history that is behind, how controversial Cuba is, all of the stuff that you might be interested in. So if Cuba is one of those countries that you have like always wanted to come, I highly recommend you guys to come with time enough, minimum a week. And of course, plan ahead. One of the things that you're gonna find in Cuba, let me tell you, is the contrast. And by contrast, I'm not talking only like physically, I'm talking about psychologically. People like talking about the country in a way, and some other people are gonna be talking in different ways. So you need to understand each point of view. This is something that is going to blow your mind, and actually something that at the same time is going to make you fall in love with the country. If you want to know more about this, I highly recommend you guys to watch this video right here that I made talking about some other Cuba tips that are going to be extremely helpful for you. Remember guys that you can go to alexr.emprende if you want to get more information, or just in case you want to visit Cuba with us. Thank you so much for watching, and see you there.